So in this video, we're going to cover this goofy keyword static. And we tend to encounter it when we see it in the main method. If we make a method that's not static, we get an error and we're like, well, why is that? And then we have to put this word static and we know, okay, that fixes it, great. Now we can use the method. But what does this word mean? Why are we using that? Now this is generally when you're in an application, but you can use it in classes too. The idea is, if you make something static, it means you do not have to instantiate that class first. You don't have to create an object of that class in order to use the private fields and the methods and the variables of that class. There's a caveat. There's something that can kind of go odd. You get weird results sometimes if you don't know what you're doing. Or, well, let's just get into it and kind of see what I'm talking about here. So I have this person class, and I've set the getAge and setAge to static. Has private data, and I also gave it a value. There's a reason for this. So when we run this, it gives us that value. Now, what's happening here? Because it's static, I'm simply able to use the name of the class, the dot operator, and then a method within that class. Generally, you would have to create an instance of the class person equals new person. Checking, see, we have just we have to give it a name. And then you'd be able to use the person dot who. And then you have access to all the modified or all the methods. This is when things aren't static. When they are static, we have immediate access to it. We don't have to create this line. We don't have to then say, okay, now this dot get age, which will work exactly the same. The caveat that I was speaking about before, so again, we run this 34. The reason is because it's set to 34. If we didn't have a value set to this, and notice that these are both static just for the purpose of this video, and we ran this, now we get 0 because we never set the age. So we'd have to do person dot set here and 34, and then we run it. Why is it not? Set age should put that in there, and then we print out this. Still, it's not giving us a value, which is interesting. Why? So looks like it's just taking the same value. There we go. That could have been causing an error. There we go. That was what it was. Because the variables were the same name, that's where you can run into issues. If this has the same name, if you're not using a this dot, which you can't, it looks like, in a static state, you have to have a different argument, for example, here. So, our train of thought, where were we at? This is finding data. This is a standard way we do this. We could, also do get name, run that. Notice that it's because we had the constructor and we set that value. So let's say we don't want to set any values and we want to just use the methods. We've set all our methods to static. Get our names and set it to there. Again, because we know that's not going to actually do anything. Now we're getting the value null. Well, again, we didn't set the name. We run this again. So what's happening here is there's an instance of that class that we're setting this value to. Probably when we import the class, or if it's in our package. It's creating a space in memory, and it's setting this to that. And then when we call that, we're getting that. So essentially we're cutting down on some code by making it static. Static essentially makes it so you have access to the thing outside of instantiating the object. Remember, now here are two examples without the static, and then the example with the without the static. That's setting the name initially, so we're not having to call this set name. And then we're able to, from there, use person dot and then all the stuff with inside that. So this essentially is instantiating that object. If we want to make methods that we can just call or other classes can call without them having to instantiate an object, that's where you would make something static. It's like creating a special condition where other things have special access to it. It's not really special other than the fact that it's making it visible to anything outside the class, and people don't have to, or the classes don't have to be instantiated in order to be used. So hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully it's not too confusing and all over the place. We can kind of summarize. When you don't make something static, the person is going to have to instantiate or create a copy of the object of the class in order to access and store stuff within those private data. Use the methods and the variables. If you make things static, it makes it so they don't have to instantiate it. They don't have to create the extra code. It's very helpful when you're having a lot of classes work together where they don't necessarily want to have a private, where you're not passing objects around. Like if you create a central person object that your game is going to use, for example, or a program might use. If you don't want to have to be passing that object around, you can make some of the methods static so that the classes have access to that same object and they don't have to pass around the object. So hopefully that makes sense, and that's the static keyword.